Our guest Samuel Jacquois is a jazz photographer from his childhood in France and his apprenticeship in photography to his discovery of this musical movement born in the United States. He has continued to pursue musicians on all continents, and particularly in Africa, where his Cameroonian father took him for the first time to jazz concert. From his very special photographic and human encounters around music, he worked on a writing project during the COVID lockdown, hence his latest book, Jazz on My Mind. He revealed his work to Laurent Soustras and Thierry Schiller. Samuel Jacquois, hello and welcome to Initiative Africa. Your latest book, Jazz on My Mind, covers your 22 years of work as a photographer of jazz musicians from around the world. How did you come up with the idea for this book?
Alors cet ouvrage est né pendant la période de la Covid.
The idea of this book was born during the COVID period, when everyone was confined at home and had nothing to do. I couldn't go to concerts anymore, I couldn't go to see the musicians, so I started to look at my archives and work, and each photo evoked a moment I spent with the musicians.
Un moment que je passais avec les musiciens.
And so I thought this could be a bit of a story, telling the story of each image I took of the musicians. So the idea was born like that. I really wanted to tell the story through my experience, the jazz that I experienced during these last 22 years.
Your work is associated with a photographic itinerant exhibition. How is it perceived in Africa?
I just came back from Cotonou in Benin, and I held an exhibition at the French Institute. And the exhibition was very successful, and I already led a photo workshop with young people. So I talked to them about my work as a photographer, about shows and concerts. They were interested to know how I worked, so the workshop was based on that. And then there was the exhibition, which lasted about 3 weeks, where I met many other young people, especially from elsewhere, and everyone really welcomed the exhibition. They asked a lot of questions, and especially because many musicians are of a certain age, I was asked how I managed to approach them, to meet them. So it was very warmly welcomed.
How do you work with your characters? You have a very different approach depending on whether you are on a concert stage or in a studio. How do you approach your characters? How do you manage to photograph them to get such lively pictures?
Well, I also have a background in journalism because I also write my stories. So when I photograph musicians off stage, I spend a lot of time asking them questions about their lives, their way of being and doing things.
Je passe beaucoup de temps à leur poser des questions sur leur vie.
And their approach to music. And then often it's also subjects and pictures that are in relation to Africa. The characters are Afro, they are of African origin.
Mais ils sont d'origine africaine. Et donc on parle beaucoup d'Afrique, de leur approche avec l'Afrique.
Therefore we speak a lot about Africa and their approaches to Africa. So I take the picture with that in mind, what they evoke in me. Well, the fact that I spend a lot of time with them talking allows me to have this Afro-African approach to their image.
Afro de leur image, quoi, en fait. Voilà, c'est-à-dire que c'est des photographes.
They are musicians who are very interested in Africa, so my photography is really to be close to who they are.
Une photographie qui leur ressemble. Et quand ils sont sur scène.
And when they are on stage, you have to be very patient. You have to look and observe how they behave on stage, how they move and what their attitude is.
Quelle est leur attitude? Et moi, j'essaye de souvent.
And I often try to capture, let's say, like a mimic, because often musicians, all musicians, have a mimic, a way of being on stage. Either they put their instruments down in a certain way, or they stand on stage in a different way. And it's this moment that I try to capture.
And what about this moment? Is it just instinct or is it action?
It's, I would say, a pleasure, because when you manage to capture the moment that characterizes the musician, it's really a pleasure. You say to yourself, I've got it, that's it.
Voilà.
You travel and take pictures, and somewhere the two are linked. I'm thinking of your Nigeria subject, your trip to Nigeria and your meeting with Femi Kuti and his family.
Déjà le voyage, on va parler du voyage parce que...
First of all, the journey. We're going to talk about travel because I dreamed of being a pilot when I was a child, so I always have the idea of traveling.
Mais la rencontre avec Femi, c'était...
And that was just a diversion. But meeting Femi was, well, my dream was always to meet Fela, his father, but I never got that opportunity. I thought that the day I have the opportunity to go to Nigeria, I would seize that opportunity to meet the Kuti family. And I often met Femi Kuti in Paris or his brother soon. And one day I was in Dakar and met a musician called Ade Bantu. He is a Nigerian musician, a German half-breed. He is Nigerian and German, and he said to me, "If you have the opportunity, come to Nigeria. I will welcome you in my house." I said yes, and then 2 months later I called him and said I am at the airport in Lagos, and he said, "What shall we do?" I told him I would like to meet the Kuti family, and he immediately picked up the phone. He called and I had an appointment, and everything went well. Femi warmly welcomed us. I interviewed him and photographed him, of course, as he was getting ready to go on stage. I went to the new shrine where the Kuti family often plays. I even visited the Fela Museum. It has nothing to do with the exhibition that is taking place in Paris at the moment.
Il n'a rien à voir avec l'exposition qui a lieu en ce moment à Paris, mais j'ai eu aussi à voir aussi sa sœur.
But I also had to see his sister and his other brothers, who are not musicians. It's a big family.
Fait beaucoup de, on va dire
Quite respected that people often come to consult for their opinion on music, even their approach to life. It's a family that's very respected.
Famille qui est très respectée, quoi.
And what did you take away from this trip to Nigeria, the country where jazz really vibrates?
Alors c'est un pays qui est en pleine ébullition.
It's a country that's in full swing. It's not just jazz. There's a lot of music being made there. In terms of jazz, there is an absolutely incredible Nigerian scene. I've met a lot of jazz musicians from elsewhere who I also had the opportunity to see at Midem in Cannes. And it's a scene that moves a lot. Much deserved to be known in Europe.
Il se faire connaître en Europe, quoi, en fait.
Samuel Jacqua, you said, I quote, "Jazz has invaded my daily space, but before that, you were a young Frenchman of Cameroonian origin who learned to develop photography at 15 in a club in France. Then you left to study in Montreal. What drove you then?"
Quand je commence à faire de la photographie.
When I started doing photography, I had nothing to do with jazz. I was at a boarding school in Milan, and every Wednesday I learned to shoot and develop images.
J'apprends à tirer, à développer des images, et c'est comme ça que
And that's how I got hooked on images. And I learned chemistry to be able to make all these mixtures to shoot photographs. And that's how I got into photography.
C'est comme ça que je tombe dans la photographie, quoi. Puis le jazz en lui-même, c'est beaucoup plus avant même. C'est-à-dire que quand j'étais tout petit, mon père était...
When I was very young, my father was a medical student, and often on weekends he would listen to a lot of jazz and a lot of music, Afro-music, Afro-American music.
Beaucoup de musique afro-américaine. Et moi, à l'âge de 4 ans, j'étais...
And at the age of 4, I was already receptive to all that. But I didn't know at the beginning that it was going to take over me, that it was going to... Well, you know, when you're a kid, you absorb it all. And then when you're older, you think, where did that come from? You ask yourself questions when it's a whole life experience. All this stays, you keep it inside you, and sometimes it comes out and sometimes it doesn't. And in my case, as I love music, it's inevitably jazz that has invaded me. It has invaded my whole life, my daily life.
Mon quotidien. Voilà. Et puis aussi... il faut dire que quand je suis allé à Montréal...
And also, when I went to Montreal, it was the ideal place for jazz because there's a big jazz festival there. And I could see my idols, Aretha Franklin, Charlie Horn, and many jazz musicians that I would never have imagined meeting.
N'aurais jamais imaginé rencontrer.
France, Cameroon, it is through your family that you were initiated to the world of jazz in Africa, to the jazz clubs in Douala, for example?
Oui, ma famille, mais c'est surtout mon père.
Yes, my family, but it's good. It's mainly my father who took me to my first jazz concert with Rhoda Scott, who our dear late Manu Dibango had brought to Cameroon for a jazz residency from Thursday to Saturday night.
Au samedi soir Rhoda Scott était installé dans un club.
Rhoda Scott was in a club playing, and my father told me, one day, come on, I'll take you to a concert. And that's when I got into jazz. I saw my first jazz concert. I must have been 13 or 14 years old. Yeah, that's it. When I was 13 or 14, I told Rhoda Scott about it, and she was amused.
Ça l'a amusé, quoi.
And the link between photography and jazz, how did this happen?
Alors, le lien, c'est parce que
the link, once again, was made by chance, because when I came back from Montreal, I had to go for a report about a hip-hop group at the time called Skunk.
Un groupe de hip-hop. À l'époque, il s'appelait Skunk. Bon, le Skunk.
And that day, there was no photographer because I was writing at that time. I wrote a lot. So, as I said, as I remembered, I had always taken pictures. I'll take some pictures and then we'll see. So I went on a report and I took some photos. And when I returned, they told me, oh, your pictures are very good. Continue. And then I started to meet a lot of jazz musicians, and every time I interviewed them, I wanted to have a picture of them. And I had my little camera. They would pose for me. So that's it. It was always after the interviews. There was always a picture I would take of them. But I didn't think about making books or exhibitions out of them. In the beginning, it was really about having them for myself.
Les avoir pour moi.
You're a great observer of the African musical scene. How is jazz being transmitted in Africa today? Does it have a bright future? I mean, as bright as its past?
Alors, le jazz, déjà...
So jazz in the beginning, well, Africans didn't know that jazz was born from slavery, and there was a whole process.
Le jazz était né de l'esclavage, et tout. Il y a eu tout un processus. Et même avant,
and even before, and also after, some sailors came to Africa with some jazz records and all of that.
Des disques de jazz et tout ça. Mais aujourd'hui, le jazz...
But today jazz is transmitted through festivals. There is a jazz festival in Ouagadougou. There is one in the Ivory Coast and there is one in South Africa. There's one in Cameroon and there's one in Benin. Finally, almost all of Africa is starting to be invaded by jazz festivals. At the same time, there are also musicians like Ray Lema, musicians like Etienne Mbappé and Richard Bona, Lionel Loueke, and many musicians. I can name a lot of them.
Une nouvelle comment dirais-je, scène musicale.
A new, how shall I say, a new musical scene that also plays with great musicians like Herbie Hancock.
Enfin, il y a beaucoup de musiciens de jazz africains.
Many African jazz musicians have traveled the world and sometimes come back to Africa and share their experiences with other Africans. They do initiation workshops on drums like Paco Seri.
Comme Paco Seri. Ils font beaucoup d'échanges.
They do a lot of exchanges. They teach local musicians how to play jazz. And that's how jazz comes back to Africa, through these exchanges.
C'est comme ça que le jazz...
And these African musicians going back and forth to the United States.
Va et vient avec les musiciens africains qui vont aux États-Unis ou même
or even to Europe. And then they come back to do their workshops in Africa.
En Afrique.
Samuel Jacqua, thank you very much.
Merci.